This is Andrew Dombek, and this is the Get Back With Dombek podcast. We are sponsored by AID Performance Physical Therapy. We are at downtown Leesburg at the Tpow studios. If you haven't been down here, check them out. It's a really cool spot across from Tally Ho. I'm really appreciative of the help that these guys have given me in getting the podcast up and running. Today's guest is a really good friend of mine. My opinion, he's like the best trainer in the area. I would go so far to say that I would trust him with my daughter's return to playing soccer. In fact, he is the trainer for both myself and my daughter. Please welcome another Broad Run and Virginia Tech alum, Rhys Gully. Thanks for coming on today, bud.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. Thank you, Tpow. I mean, the place is great. It looks great. It's old-fashioned. Love it. So I appreciate both of you for having me.
Thank you.
The only thing you forgot was the Woodford, but that's okay.
We'll have to have a follow-up.
We'll have to have a follow-up, yeah. So, Rhys, you're a personal trainer. What is your sports background first? What did you start playing growing up?
So growing up, I mean, back in our day, everyone played 3 sports. You don't really see that now. Everyone specializes in one. So
hold on, back in our day, I'm a little bit older than.
But,
do you have an our day yet? Back in my day.
But it was baseball, basketball, football. And then I didn't really start to specialize till about high school, and I just went to basketball. And pretty much the funny thing was I chose basketball because I wasn't that good at it. So I saw something challenging there. Baseball, like 7th, 8th grade, I was throwing 70 already, throwing perfect games, no hitters every time. I think I just got bored with it. And so I switched to basketball because I wasn't great at it. I got cut from my 8th grade basketball team. And then I actually got into training like my dad. Started me weightlifting, and then freshman year, I made the Broad Run freshman team and started. So I went from not being in that like top 12 to being like the top 1 or 2. And then it was a snowball effect. I was on JV, varsity as a junior, and I was a captain senior year. So back then, honorable mention, Washington Post, which covered all the schools in the area, like your private schools as well. So again, most of my, I would say, traits in life, when I see a challenge, I like to accept it and then overcome it. So I think that plays a big part on where I've gotten to today and what I try to instill with a lot of my teams, clients, and kids that come along my way as well.
You don't miss playing baseball with all that money? I think they're having the amateur draft.
Now you sound like my dad. So he gives me a hard time to this day about that. So
yeah, I got a kid that I don't know, has any of the kids that you've worked with get drafted over the last 2 days?
No, not this year. Yeah.
Not yet. I'm waiting. Yet. I got one kid. I'm got my fingers crossed. I texted his dad and him last night, and like I'm praying that you guys get drafted. These are the Yard Martinez. He's out of Champ and went to Georgetown. So okay. I wish him the best. So you kind of alluded to my second question. Like, so the personal training. It sounds like your dad kind of sparked the
love for it. Yeah.
The love for it.
A little bit about my dad grew up in Alice Springs, Australia. That's where I was born. And back then when my mom and him were together, my dad actually owned 2 gyms.
I didn't know that.
My mom owned a fashion design company as well. So when they basically hit that market pretty good there, my dad actually trained with Mr. Olympia a few times and had a couple national bodybuilding winners when it came to that physique. So he instilled weightlifting into me at a young age. I saw the benefits. Graduated Broad Run. I applied to one college, Virginia Tech, early. Got in, so I was like, oh, screw it, I don't need any more work. Went there, did BIT my freshman year. I remember one day in my dorm, it was like a Sunday, one of our projects was build a website. And I think we used Dreamweaver back then. You old guys will know what that is.
I've heard of it, but yeah. Computers are not my forte.
I sat at my desk for about 10 to 12 hours that day, and I related that to an office job. And I was like, I can't see myself doing this at all. So looked at other majors. I saw exercise science. Really sparked my interest. And then I brought that up to my parents. And, of course, they both said no because they had lived that life already. They knew that grind. So I was like, all right, what about pre-med? No parent's going to say no to pre-med. So I did that and exercise science. So I graduated basically double option, double major, whatever you want to call it. But then when I graduated Virginia Tech, I really had no idea what I was going to do. And you can't really do much with those degrees, to be honest. So I just told myself I'll get certified, be a personal trainer until I find myself a real job. Well, now we're 12 years later, and I'm still doing it, and that's also, I think it plays part with you truly find what you love and you're successful at that. So I stumbled upon it, saw the success in it, and that's why I'm still in it today. But I mean, leading up to that, at Virginia Tech, besides those majors, I interned with the football team, the basketball team, and I got to work with some great physical therapists like Mike Goforth. He's been there for like 30 years, and Coach Gentry in the strength room. So he's retired now, but he's even got a book. And when it comes to the strength and conditioning world, he's considered one of the top dogs. So, and if you look at those draft classes that came out when I was at Tech, I mean, we're top 5 every year for football, basketball. That was the last time we were in March Madness until this past year. So I got to work with Tyrod Taylor, David Wilson, a lot of those top guys that were 3, 4, 5 stars that also got drafted. So I got to see a high level of athlete training at a young age and saw how some of the guys that have been in the field for 20, 30 years sort of dealt with them in terms of their attitudes, personality traits, but also how do you work with a high level athlete. Some people think you got to come something extraordinary to meet those needs. Sometimes you just can't do the basic stuff simple. So I learned that was one big message I got from Virginia Tech. And then graduated, got hired at Sport and Health, which we are now One Life, and learned about explosive performance, which is dealt with all athlete training when it comes to adults, move better, feel better. So more like that physical therapy realm and stuff. And we were at 4 locations, like 10 trainers. Now we're at 31 locations and have 150 trainers on staff. So I'm actually the regional director in terms of education for them. So I oversee those 31 sites when it comes to education and onboarding and training up that staff.
Yeah, I remember you doing an internship. I think it was like George Washington. Like you were already one of the smartest people I know, and then you're like, hey, I'm gonna go take this class and do an internship with, was it George Mason or
George Mason?
George Mason.
George Washington. Actually.
Yeah, George, and you were working with you wound up working with their athletic or their strength and conditioning coach and the basketball team. What was that? What made you want to go? I know you're always liking to learn new stuff, but
yeah, I always find new stuff to learn. I picked the worst time ever to do that internship. It was right when my son was born too, and moved houses. So between that and a full-time job, I was running low. But no, I needed new scenery. So I wanted to get out again. You grow by seeing different views of training, and that was another way I could do it. And I got to work under Matt Johnson. Very fortunate. And he's actually the head strength and conditioning coach at Butler now, and he's doing great things there. Especially they don't recruit as well, but I mean they're top 5, top 10 every year. So and they have low injuries. So you got to attribute some of that to him. And one of his biggest philosophies is giving back to the strength and conditioning field. So I picked up a lot of that from him, and that's what I try to do with my staff or anyone that reaches out. My job is within 24 hours, I feel like I should give them a response and try to set up a way I can help them learn or take a step forward in succeeding.
Yeah, I always like when you have these guys that come into the office that are like big, huge guys, and there's specific muscles that they never train. And you go and I had a guy today who actually broke his arm wrestling. It was only the second time he ever did it, but major injury, fractured his humerus. Yeah. And I mean, this guy was a huge guy, so I can only imagine. He said, and he was super big then, and back when, and I actually got a workout doing his muscle tests, but then I got to like, with a shoulder problem. And I was like, I bet you his middle trap, his lower trap, and his serratus are weak, and did everything. And I went to there and just humbled him, straight down. But as I digress, and I've seen that where I've had some of the Washington Redskins, I've had some, work with some Yankees and Diamondback players, and they come in and they don't a lot of times and even I've had some girls that were All-American high school soccer players, played at Arkansas. They're like, hey, we didn't even see half of these exercises when we were training. And that's one of the things I think I like about you is that what a lot of the local programs are doing and what these kids aren't getting. So when they come to you, you're able to fill in the gaps that they're actual, especially, the soccer team, the girls soccer team isn't going to get as much love as the varsity football team at, like,
Correct.
let's say Virginia Tech or Duke or whatnot. One of the things I like about Rhys is, and how we met, is we had a mutual client, and he reached out to me. He's like, hey, I want to come in and introduce myself and meet you, and I kind of want to see what you're doing with my athlete. And that was kind of one of the first times we met, and it was kind of similar, that we shared some of the same training philosophy, because we trained under some of the same personal trainers and physical therapists. One that comes to mind, I think it was Gray Cook.
Yep.
Was one of the guys that kind of brought us together. Can you elaborate to the audience on some of the other philosophies on top of, because I know we both still use different variations of Gray's work. It still stands to this day. A lot of people are, all over the country are using his programs.
Yeah, I mean, to go on that story that Andrew was talking about, was client was Chance Dangermond, played basketball, broad run. He had a high ankle sprain, so it swelled up pretty bad. I think the doctor tried to put him in a boot, and we said no. So went in, saw that, and introduced myself to Andrew. And through the introduction, I was like, yeah, well, anytime I see an athlete, I always take them through a functional movement screen first as part of my assessment. That way, a few reasons, if I see any red flags, we know there's an issue that's got to be referred out. Or if I see any asymmetries or imbalances, I know what to address within the training. So I think when I brought that up, I think that's what sort of caught Andrew off guard, because especially back then, I don't think many trainers were going that extensive into their certs. No. It's one of those things, if you're lucky, you find a trainer if they're certified. But then again, I'm certified, but then I was continuing to grow and wanted to find ways to connect with networking in the area, but also resources on how to help my athletes return to play faster. And we all know most of the time, most physical therapy clinics, they get you back to your everyday life. Like, can you go up and down the stairs, go to the restroom, do your groceries? Pretty much it. And they're just like, yep, you're good to go back on the field. We know, especially in this area, there's a lot of elite level athletes now. They can't be treated that way. So how do we go from that point to where they are ready on the field, where their injury risk has reduced, or that where they're in the best position to optimize their skill. So and that just led to deeper conversations about Gray Cook and some of the stuff we use as their corrective work. I think we also went more into depth with like Stuart McGill when it comes to dealing with low backs. I mean, he's the god when it comes to that, always pumping out data every year. And then we even got into like TPI. I haven't gotten TPI cert, but pretty much the FMS is a derivative of it. So a lot of our lingo was familiar there. And then, besides your basic certs in education, he knows. I think you're thinking about getting CSCS, right? Just to
I've entertained that. You're like, you're at your point in your career, you're like, it's not really going to be helpful. CSCS is a certified strength and conditioning coach. I probably should have looked into that way back when, but programming, I leave that up to Rhys. That's learning a lot about programming. I thought, is there a way that I can better help my athletes, because we've been treating at AID, we've been getting a lot of athletes these days, which I love, and I think that's just kind of one of the things that's just grown my word of mouth. But we also, as much as my clinic is built for athletes, we have a sled, we have turf, we have a full rig and everything like that, and plyo boxes and impact wall and trampolines. There's also limitations in time, that there's only so much I can do with an athlete, and I realize that it comes to that kind of collaborative care, that there's things that it gets to that point where, after about 3 months, I could have an ACL, and if I need to do everything with them, they could be in the clinic for 4 or 5 hours. I already have them in there for an hour and a half too, which puts a strain on your resources. We don't see more than 2 clients an hour, but then if you have an ACL kind of lagging around, so I was like, hey, I need trainers to be able to send them to kind of work in collaboration where, all right, we don't have a leg press machine, we don't have the programming knowledge. I have some basic programming, and that's where I said, hey, I often recommend Rhys, and I'm always willing. I've interviewed a lot of different personal trainers, but it's a matter of, the difference I think with the guys that work at EP and is that a lot of them have either been, in order to become an EP trainer, they have to have been a trainer for a long time, or they have to have a degree in exercise science, which I thought say, hey, there's one level of just here, let me show you how to lift weights, but there's another thing to be able to understand the healing times of, at what point can you introduce certain loads to the athlete. And I think that you're able to do that, and hence why, we have gone back and forth where there's a shared, where either I'll send them to you or there'll be a point where people come to you and like, hey, you're not even ready for me. You need to go see Andrew.
Yep.
So what is your thoughts on like that collaborative care? I know you probably work with not only me, but I'm sure there's high school athletic trainers, chiropractors, other physical therapists, doctors in the areas. What is your thoughts on, and coaches, I know, for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as, I got my toolbox. Which tool do I need, and which tool best suits that client or that team? So that's where having resources like Andrew, having a chiropractor, having a nutritionist, a psychologist, those all play a big part, because at the end of the day, I want to try to set up the best scenario for that client, just like how your NFL team or your NBA team. When you go to them and let's say LeBron gets injured, within 4 or 5 hours, he's probably gone through all those people. So if we can do that for some of these high-level kids to help them recover and get back to that field of play that they love to do so much, we're just going to help optimize and give them all the best resources possible. Now, we may give you all those resources, but at the end of the day, it's on you, the athletes, to now use those tools. So again, we can preach everything and give you that, but then at the end of the day, it's up to the athlete to use it. So.
Hey, if anyone wants to, I'll get a plug here. If anyone wants to invest in Rhys and My's, future business and having this all under one roof, please reach out. Out to. I joke, but I'm dead serious. We've always been in talks. I have a couple friends that are, like you said, I refer people out to the sports psychologist. He's a sports psychologist. We've had Seth Kaplan on. He's reached out to kind of wanting to work with my clients. We've got a massage therapist that you throw in there, because as much as we do body work at AID and Rhys teaches body work and with foam rolling and using, Theragun and hypervolts, you can only do so much in the time that you have with the clients. That's very important to make sure that you have, one of the things we didn't even include is with some of these people, the equipment, guys, with golfers, the proper, what's the best. Not only you have to get fit for clubs, people don't realize you got to get fit for a golf ball too. We never really talked about that. I know Troy's a big golfer, but you need the proper, everyone sees, what do the pros use? And like, was the Pro V1s and Pro VX? Yeah. And then like, those are made for the pros, but you'll have every, Tom, Dick, and Harry go out and you talked about like the TPI certified, and it's funny, it's like they, why would Titleists want to get into personal training? Have I ever told you why they got into personal training?
I don't know why.
So they're, and I don't know if I've ever elaborated on it. I actually was like this close from being a part of like the Titleist Performance Institute. They had this place called Club Golf in Rockville, where Dr. Greg Rose was under one roof, and they had he's a head of the TPIs. They had a golf instructor. They had personal training, physical therapist, chiropractor, all in one roof. It was really cool. They had indoor hitting. They had the K vest at the time, which was like the top of the line. Video analysis. They had indoor putting green, indoor sand trap. It was fantastic. And I interviewed for one of the for the company that ran the physical therapy part, and I'd actually just moved from. They wanted me to work at Club Golf, which was in Rockville, and I was living in Germantown when I interviewed for them, and they were like, "Hey, we loved your resume, but we didn't have a position for you at this time." And they had another clinic over in Silver Spring. So by that time, I moved to Arlington, and they're like, "Hey, would you like a job in Shady Grove?" I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" I'm like, I work in DC now. It's like a 10-minute commute. This is the last thing I want to do, even though it was reversed. But so that from there, Greg, they got involved. I guess they saw the concept, and Titleist approached them. I think Nike has it, but it's not to the same extent. Essentially, Titleist golf fitness instructor, which I am, and I posted something a couple weeks ago. I went out and started playing some golf, and people were like, "Oh, look at your form and stuff like that." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm actually certified golf fitness instructor." And they have different levels. They have medical. They have for the personal trainer and different, and for the instructors, but their whole purpose of getting into training was to sell more golf balls.
Oh, right.
that was the crazy thing is like, ideally it's like, well, when you and I have a symbiotic relationship, is like, what is that I can do that I can help your business flourish, and vice versa. Same thing when I go out to reach out to a new sports nutritionist. What is it that I can do to help your business, and how can, what is it, how can I help you, and vice versa, so that we can make each other kind of grow. So their main thing is if you're injured, you can't lose golf balls.
Yeah.
So I mean the markup on golf balls is ridiculous. A dozen. I don't know what, I don't buy them. What is it? Troy, how much is it? At least, is it still $60 for a dozen?
About
55, $60 for a dozen golf balls, and you'll have Joe Schmo that goes up to Belmont Country Club. He doesn't have his golf balls, and he'll go buy a sleeve of Pro V1s. And then, they're gone within the first 3 holes. But, he doesn't care. But that's, essentially. But the thought is like, if people are injured, they're not going to be buying golf balls. Because the clubs, there's only so much markup with it, with the market research on golf clubs and the technology. It's constantly changing, but the golf ball technology is, doesn't change at the same, at the same speed. So they're like, hey, what is it if people aren't out there? And, they essentially pulled some of the best minds in athletic training, and that's where the first time I heard about the golf, or the collaborative care, where they had a golf pro, they had the equipment guy, and so on and so forth. So they involved Gray Cook in developing their TPI analysis is also part of Gray's selective movement analysis, which is like the next step, which goes a little bit further than the FMS that we use. But anyways, I've kind of digressed into that collaborative care. It's such a great thing. So speaking of golfers, what are some of the other athletes that you work with? Sports, first and foremost?
All sports. Soccer, swimming, basketball, baseball, football. I've even had horseback riding throughout my years, competitive one. Everything under the sun. Lacrosse. Yeah,
Mike Mabry,
Mabry, one of my boys, yep. Aren't
you the strength and conditioning coach for PVI?
PVI, yep. So I think this is going to be my 4th year there with them. Growing program. We're excited where it's going.
Did they name him yet the head coach?
No, they didn't name him this year, so. Hopefully he'll get it. I know he's got plenty of opportunities, and one great thing about Mike is he's always confident. He looks at situations like that as ways to grow or see the light in those situations. So when you got someone like that young, I tell parents I think he's a great role model for most kids that are growing up, and I'd want him to be a coach of any team of mine.
He's forward thinking, because he and I have had conversations. Is like, when I become head coach somewhere, he's like, I want you to be the physical therapist. He sent me one of his players. His player lives all the way out in Springfield.
Yeah.
And they've come several times out, all the way out from Springfield, because they believe it. I don't know if he just started training the kid, I guess, and they just believed in so much in Mike that they're like, anything that Mike says, we'll go and do.
Well, I think he's just, when he talks, he's pure, and that's a quality hard to find in people. So
sincere, definitely honest, yeah,
exactly, and when you see that, it also shows that they care. So I think that goes a long way. And when my son, he's about to be 5 in September, and I'm trying to get a lacrosse stick in his hands, and when the time comes, I want Mike to be his mentor, because he believes a lot of the same things I do. And when it comes to that, I'm the dad. Sometimes my words will wear thin, so I got to have someone else explain that and express that way to my son. So I look forward to Mike being proactive with my son as well. So
I laugh because my daughter, you can't see her, she's not on camera. She's sitting behind me today. She's in studio. I don't know how much she's listening or not.
You can see her foot.
You can see her foot. But that was one of the things I enrolled. I recruited Rhys because that's that was one of the toughest things I've ever had to do, was be the physical therapist for my daughter. And I'm thank the Lord, I love you, but never again. I don't want to do that, and that's why I'm like, Sorry, I feel so special. I mean, it's tough. I mean, it's it's put a big strain on a relationship, and like you said, it's like. You can't necessarily teach your own kids. It can only go so far. And, I trust Eden with Rhys and all of the trainers over there. I mean, I have a great respect for Rhys. And so with Rhys, I know that he wouldn't hire some everyday schmo off the street, that they have to have a certain criteria, a certain level of integrity. And I think that's great with you working with, young athletes. In your opinion, which sport athletes work the hardest?
That's hit or miss, I think, with today's generation. They do like to have a lot of things handed and just come their way. But I've seen positives in both. Like some of my soccer girls, man, they don't know. I have to tell them to back off, stop. But most of your football players are like that. But that's also the culture of that sport. So I don't want to necessarily just give it to them, the title of that. So I think it comes down to more the kid and the kid's demeanor, how he or she was brought up. When it comes to that, on works harder, because I've seen it in all of them, but I've also seen the lazy ones in all the sports. So I think I don't think that can be exact pick to a sport.
You've worked with many athletes, from me working with you from youth, high school, college, all the way up to the pros. Can you tell me about some of those clients that you work with, and what are the differences in working with them? I know I've recently took certification to become a champion performance physical therapist by a guy by the name of Mike Reinold, who's a physical therapist up in Boston, and I think he's a consultant now with the White Sox. In the past, he worked with the Red Sox back when they, Big Papi was one of his guys, and worked with a lot of the pitchers up there. And I've, learned his way, and I've seen his integrative movement assessment. Then I've also gone through and watched some of their other evaluations. And part of the reason why I like Mike so much is that we're the same age, but we have very similar treatment philosophies. And he's also, you go watch some stuff, and he's integrated the SFMA in there into his. It's a combination. It's it's one of those things. It's like I just don't have one set of tools. I got a toolbox, and I can reach in and grab different philosophies and different training methodologies, because not everything works with everyone. But one of the things I've learned is there's a training age and there's a chronological age. As I asked this question, is like you could have two 13-year-olds that are coming into the gym, or two 15-year-olds. Yeah. The 15-year-old could be have already been training for 3 years. They're the same age, but that one that's been training for 3 years, either A, could have bad habits, or B, has the better habits. So even though these two people are the same age, they're not the same lifting age.
Correct.
So how do you address that especially with your team training? I guess this is a secondary question. We can come back to all those athletes that you've worked with.
That's very broad. So So we can go into many situations with that. So usually when we got a kid with a high training age, like the guy that's 13, been training for 3 years, we know he has a high nervous system, high firing rate, probably knows basic movement patterns really well, and has a higher tissue tolerance. So he could probably come in, and we can probably give him more intense workout, knowing those things. And stuff that challenges his motor units or motor skills a little bit more, versus the 13-year-old that has no training age. We might want to think basic, simple things establish well. So maybe he's doing a bunch of isometrics where we're teaching form of an exercise, but in an isolated position. So if we need to correct him, we'll correct him while he's paused, instead of trying to correct him while he's moving. And then I think at the same time, introduce new movement patterns, or simple stuff like even marching and skipping. You'll be surprised how many 13-year-olds can't march or skip.
I'm not surprised because I see adults that can't march and skip when they come into my office. It totally makes sense. Now, what age, before we go back to that, one of the age-old questions I get is how young is too young to start lifting weights?
So
I know you get that one a lot.
all the time. Lifting weights, it depends how you look at lifting weights. When you say lifting weights, I look at resistance training. That's what I feel you're referring to. Any age, because that means we can do push-ups. We can do bodyweight squats. We can do box jumps. Those are all body weight or faster movements, sprinting. Even sprinting is a strength exercise. So to say someone can't do that, no, we just got to build them up to the point where they can handle it based upon strength, tissue tolerance, movement quality. So if you got someone that can do a bodyweight squat, great, cool. Let's have them do a goblet squat, like a 10-pound dumbbell. If they can do that for 20 reps, why can't we move that up to a 20-pound? So we can progress the kids to more higher level resistance training, but they're all going to start from some sort of resistance training, if that's isometric or body weight. So any age in my mind when it comes to that. But yeah, I mean, if you look at a lot, think about like the great story about Milo, right? He carried a bull up the hill every day from when it was a calf. And then a year later, it was a bull. That year later, Milo was stronger because every day that bull or that calf that became a bull gained a pound or half a pound. But over time, that was like 200-300 pounds. He ended up getting stronger over years. So why couldn't we do that to a kid as to introduce them to a weight training philosophy? But at the end of the day, at those ages, our goal should be to keep it fun, keep it simple, and keep them entertained so they don't lose attention.
Yeah, attention, especially now this day and age. I mean, I think also when you think of like training at a young age, you look at the freak of an athlete in DK Metcalf. I mean,
Yeah.
He started super young, but he's into resistance band training. You
Yeah.
know, is what he's learned and has been doing that. I mean, the guy's just an amazing, but he's that.
But he could be into that too because he's got such a strong base of strength from lifting at such an early training age. Now he sort of needs more like reactive strength. So how efficient, how fast can we be at moving that? It's like the same thing with our plyos. If we teach someone how to do a drop squat or a non-counter, that's a plyometric, but it's a very slow plyometric, right? But we end up progressing them to where they might do 5 tuck jumps in a row, getting off the ground fast. That's reactive. A lot of those guys, they look at that band work as being more reactive with the weight, but at a lower load too. So, because that might have been a spectrum they missed. But when you got so much strength, we got to find other things on the spectrum that's going to enhance that strength. So like at Exos, where I've gone and done multiple combine trainings with, once they reach 435 on deadlift with a green band, which is like that 1-inch band, they will not load the bar up any heavier. There's no point. There's no point to be deadlifting more than that much weight. We're gonna have you move that weight probably faster, more explosively or more efficiently, but we're gonna make sure that you stay fast on the field, or we're gonna work on some of your movement skills on the field instead, and prioritize that over the strength, because that strength you're not really gonna lose once you get there, unless you sit around for a month and do nothing. But yeah, that's the way I probably look at a lot of that stuff.
So for those people don't know what a counter or a non-counter is if you're going to jump up and do your vertical leap, non-counter move is you just standing stationary and you just jump up and reach out as high as you can, versus a counter move is where you would take a step back and then put your arms behind you, and then with full motion you take a leap up that way. So that would be one example of a counter versus non-counter movement. I know Rhys mentioned isometric. You have concentric movements, eccentric movements, and isometric movement. A concentric movement is just essentially moving a weight through your normal range of motion. Eccentric, some of you who understand, like a negative would be an eccentric would be you lift the weight up, or someone lifts the weight for you, and then you slowly lower that weight down. And an isometric means you either you put your body in a position and you hold it, so similar to like a wall squat or a wall sit or just a basic thing. Or you could do, for instance, with an ACL, you'd have them, initially, and there's controversy about when to start long arc quads, short arc quads, but the initial range of motion is limited. We'd like to limit it for the first 2 months is, from 90 degrees, which is your leg hanging off the table, to about 60 to 40 degrees or whatever, and so you would put a stop and they just push into the resistance. They can't go any further into that resistance. So that's an example of an isometric strength training terminology. So just as I
you got that good.
digress there. But that's really interesting, for those also people who know Exos is one of the first, I guess, kind of.
They match the one-stop shop that you and I were talking about. Yeah. So when you walk in, I remember the first time I was in there, walk in, we're in the lounge area. On the way to the lounge area, I'm looking through these glass rooms, and you got a whiteboard that had plays written up. Another room, there's a guy selling suits to all the draft guys, getting ready for their draft day. And we're sitting there in the lounge, and it's like 6:30 in the morning, and me and my buddy Avedis are half asleep, and he looks at me like all bug-eyed. If you know Avedis, you know what I'm talking about. And
he just reached out to me the other day. He's like, "Hey, do you remember me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course I remember you."
Yeah, he wants to get some dry needling done. So, but he looks at me like with his expression, like, "Yo, look behind you." And I look behind, and it's just Kaepernick playing ping pong with Byron Jones, and Byron Jones actually broke the broad jump record at the combine that year. So that was pretty crazy. And we were there during Super Bowl week, so Hasselbeck was there because he was announcing it. He was working out, so we got to work with him a little bit. Dustin Pedroia had just won the MVP for the Red Sox. We got to work with him. And then
I just got in trouble because I was up. We went up to Boston a couple weeks ago, and it was Dustin Pedroia Day, and I didn't, and it was versus the Yankees, and it was a Friday night game, and Eden's not a big baseball fan, and I'm a fan of the sport, but I'm a front running Nationals fan, and I didn't know it was Dustin Pedroia. I know who he is by name, and my friend Lynn was like, "I cannot believe you made me turn down Dustin Pedroia Day tickets." I was like, "Yeah, I saw." I said they retired his number, didn't they? She's like, "Yeah." She's like, "And they gave away bobbleheads." And I was like, "Oh."
That's the key there. She didn't care about the number; it was the bobblehead.
But not only that, it would have been. It was the first time for me at Fenway, but it was the Yankees Red Sox, and that series. Aren't you a Yankees fan? Yeah, they got swept. I mean,
they're not good this year.
No, I mean
what? You're the only team to lose 2 games, giving up 4 runs in the 9th in the last 500 games, or then that's been a possibility, and you've done it in 10 days. You guys have no closing though, so that's the issue.
The question is now is with the Nats going out west, and actually they had the Dodgers, and they went the Padres, the Giants. Who's up on the trading block now? I mean, you're out of it. It's time to. What do you think? I mean, have you worked with any Nationals?
Not Nationals, but I've worked with 2 of our clients that we've had. Connor Molee.
Had him on. He had seen you for quite so many years, and then I think for like 3 or 4 years, you tell him like, Connor, like, go see Rhys. I think that was like after his 3rd elbow, where he had 2 Tommy Johns and then like a scope. No, he only had 1 Tommy John. It was just he had the avulsion fracture, and
that's right.
And it was a non-union, and then they had to reattach it.
And then was the third? There was a 3rd one.
That was a 2. The third, the final surgery was the nerve, the where they went in and wrapped the cushioning around the nerve because he was starting to lose feeling in his hand once he made it up all the way to the Yankees.
So finally after the 3rd one, Connor's like, okay. And I think a little bit of was I'm a year older than Connor, so he knew me in high school. So it's sort of hard to trust your pro career with someone that you probably had known so long. So he came and saw me, and that's when we got to work on that collaborative care. And that year, Connor made it through the minors, got up to major leagues. We got him, I think 98 he topped off at. He reached 99 maybe. Throwing harder than what he was before the surgeries, and got a couple of debuts with the Yankees. So he's one of those. I think that's one of the only things we could say, or we put on our resume. Like, I haven't heard of many pitchers that have 3 elbow surgeries and to still make the pros. So I think that's pays a part like of that collaborative care that we offer to our clients and all those resources, because we got some pretty amazing stories like that. And then I got Taylor Clark. I've worked with him for about 5-6 years. He lives in Arizona now, but he flies back for at least 2 or 3 weeks, gets some training in with me, still calls me up if anything's wrong. He's a different story. He came to me. He was a third-round pick, I think, out of college.
The first pick of the third round. We just had.
Yeah.
I think he's one of our guests.
I trained him in high school, a little bit in college. He reached back out, and I think he weighed like 203 then, and throwing about 93 miles per hour when he came out. And I told him, I was like, our goal is to try to get you to 220 as a body weight. Get your legs incredibly strong, because that's where you should be generating all that push off the mound. It shouldn't be coming from your arm. If it is, you're not gonna have a long career. But where I got that 220 stat was that year Cressy actually posted a stat saying last year 20 guys threw over 100 miles per hour. 19 of the 20 weighed 220 or more. So like I try to find like little cool data picks like that or research, and sure enough, like when we got him up to 220, he sits around 223 now. He topped off at 99 the other day, and I think next year he's gonna hit 100. Like and this is all why he's been getting older, 23 to 28, 29. So I think that's also when it comes to training, people want the overnight pill. Like it's a process, and both Connor, both Taylor believed in the process that we laid out to get them to where they wanted, and believed in that process. So it's got to go both ways. So
yeah, and I remember talking to Eve and said you got to play multiple sports, leading up, because that's one of the things. It's crazy that some of the parents will wind up, because a lot of these kids wind up throwing harder. And it's stupid. They're throwing harder after they get Tommy John. So the parents are like, well, they're going to have it. Let's go ahead and get the surgery over and done with. The reason why people are throwing harder after Tommy John has nothing to do with the surgery. It has everything to do with the physical therapy and the training that occurs, teaching them how to properly use their body to generate that force that they know that needs to come from the legs and the core, then into the scapular stabilizers, and then the arm, and also making sure that their mechanics are better. That's why the pitchers are pitching better after Tommy John. The Tommy John is not making them pitch faster.
And I think they're probably doing things that they weren't doing before, like lift their legs. Because I know as an athlete, you're just gonna die. So I can't. Okay, if I can't do anything, and my doctor said I can lift my legs, all right, I'll lift my legs. And then they get rest too. Like these kids and these athletes have been go since like probably 5th grade. So like even that may just give them a mental or find a new love for the game. So I think it's, again, the part of that collaborative care of look at it full spectrum. The mindset, the body rest, but then also the therapy and the training side where they're actually being taught how to move correctly for once. So
one of the things I've found, we started using blood flow restriction in the office. We use it with Eden. I use it, with a lot of my clients, especially my post-op clients, to help improve the hypertrophy and the strength. But one of the things I've learned, there used to be that misnomer of when you're hurt, like let's say you broke your arm or your leg, that you shouldn't lift the opposite body part because you don't want that one to get bigger and not be able to catch up. Complete myth. That's a myth. Yeah. And that the research shows that your body still produces the testosterone and the growth hormone in order to get tissue strength gains, not as much as you are with the load. But I've got a kid.
Well, think about it. Your blood goes through your whole body. So I think it's dumb when people are like, oh, I need a rest day. I gotta get my body to rest, or I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do a leg split and an upper body split. Like, yeah, we'll still program that, but you're not really getting true rest. You're telling me all that lactic acid you built up in your legs didn't go up to your upper body at all. So that's, I think, and I got that thinking from Rob Taylor. He brought that up too.
You know what? I've never even thought about that, but that's so true.
Yeah. So I mean,
I knew the other way around. Like when we massage and decrease tone, and they release the oxytocin, they get you the body to relax. It doesn't just go. And that's some. Believe it or not,
like
you talk
if
about.
You did a calf day, it doesn't just go to your calves. Damn, like.
It's funny because you brought up Stuart McGill, and I did a bunch of research, and not a lot of people did it on. There was Stuart McGill wrote. They did a study on what are the best positions to have sex if you're suffering back pain, and they did a study, and it was one of those things. It was just like, in some of the research I found, it's like when this is kind of funny, and Troy always says, oh, you can bring up some controversial stuff. It's like, you're at the age old, like, honey, I have a headache, I can't have sex with you tonight. Well, believe it or not, when you orgasm, it releases the oxytocin, which allows you to relax, and it gets rid of the headache. So, hey, honey, you can't, the endorphins, you can't use that excuse anymore, ladies. But yeah, so that was an extreme example of how the chemicals go through. But anyways, I have this kid. His name is Nick Levy. He had shoulder surgery, had torn labrum. He's been on a lot of my social media posts, and he's going to be a senior at Broad Run, and he's got a lot of schools looking at him for long snapping. And it's funny. He's 5'8", 5'9". He's your middle linebacker. And he's maybe 5'9", 5'10", weighs at least 220, and he ran like a 4'8", 4'9", and he beat their starting corner.
Yeah.
The other day, I think they did a 30-yard, and it was just ridiculous. I'm like, this athlete. But one of the things that he's come in, and I've told him because he's worried, one of the things that, I don't know if you've encompassed this with COVID and everything, and your football players, you've got the football season is 3 months downtime between the end of the season. Stonebridge won the state championship, and now football starts in August. Mm-hmm. They won that in the end of April, beginning of May.
End of May, May.
Yeah, so to be able to, how much work do you want to put in with those guys? You need to get rest, but you also need to be able to build up and recover. I think there's going to be a big problem. Are you seeing any issues like you're lifting with, some of those teams coming in? What are you doing to?
So a couple ways to go about it. I mean, most of my athletes don't ever stop working out with me. So if it's in season, I personalize it for them. So I'm going to decrease the volume. I'm going to work more movement quality, but we'll still move some weight because we got to move weight to get that CNS fired. So, but we don't have to do 4 sets of 5. We could do 2 sets of 3. Just give your body that feel of what it's like. So when we do hit that off season, we can sort of get the ball rolling a little bit more. But I think the smart way to do it would be, and what I do with every athlete once the season ends is let them take 2-3 weeks off, just mentally. Don't think about it. Go play other stuff. And then I'll introduce a 1x20. Jim Wedler came up with it. It's 1 set of 20, pick 30 exercises.
Well, that's what you gave me this morning. I was like, I couldn't. I got through 25.
And what that does is build up all the ligament and tendon strength, because we know at the end of the day, when you work out or when you get injured, what recovers faster? Muscle. Ligaments, tendons take a lot longer to recover because there's less blood flow there. Yeah. So why not start there when we build the foundation?
This is why I use this guy. Your normal personal trainer isn't going to have this knowledge. Rhys is dropping knowledge that physical therapists. This is physiology. A lot of personal trainers, they go get a certificate out there on the internet, but they don't get this knowledge of understanding the healing and recovery purpose of it. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to start on the ligaments and tendons. I want to build those up so when I do introduce a higher level resistance training, or if my kids do go back in the high school weight room, they're going to be introduced to 3x10 or 4x5 or 4x8 day one and not be able to walk for a week because, again, that tissue tolerance it wasn't there. But my kids, they'll be able to handle that when it comes. So, again, my job is to have them optimized and continuing to be able to work out or practice the sport, because at the end of the day, that's how they get better. If they're injured, they're not going to be able to practice the skill or get better. If they're walking around sore, barely walking up and down the stairs, are they going to be able to lift just as hard the next day? Probably not. They'll probably come in and half-ass it. So those are a lot of reasons why I do that. And then from there, we'll do our basic linear periodization, like progress that to like a 2x15, 3x10, and then we'll do like 4x5s. But while we're doing all that, they're still doing some sort of speed work, some sort of plyometric work. It's just as I'm progressing the strength, I'm progressing those things as well.
Mobility as well.
Mobility. And when you're doing all those things together within one session, it's called the conjugate method. So we're hitting a little bit of each spectrum because at the end of the day, they all play a part with each other. If you want to get faster, just running on a field or running around cones ain't going to get you faster. You got to build that engine. So most of the kids I get, they're like a Volkswagen Jetta. They could probably last on that soccer field or football field or last through practice all day, every day, going at one speed, great. But we want to build you up to like 500, 600 horsepower. I want you to be a Ferrari, okay? Because you're going to put out more power, more burst, But then also, let's say we compare that to a swimmer, right? If you're going to start off a race at 600 horsepower versus someone at 200 horsepower, when you're pittering and pattering at the end, I bet you the Ferrari still wins because maybe he's at 300 horsepower now of output versus the Jetta at 150.
Yeah, I can't remember if I saw an article, but there was definitely, I think I read an article somewhere, saw something was like, I think Mike Reinhold did a podcast. It was like, I want to get faster. How do I get faster? Should I go to a strength coach or should I go to a speed coach? And I get that question all the time too. And it's like, no, you can't just, the speed coach is going to teach you form. But that's only one part of it. And I tell a lot of my runners, even my long distance, my marathoners and my cross country, I'm like, you guys need power and strength. We don't necessarily need to build you to 220, but we need to be able to get you to be able to do concentric lifts. We don't necessarily do the eccentrics where we're making your quads explode out of your body, but we need you to be able to get that power because you don't increase your stride length by taking a longer step. You increase your stride length because you're blowing off the ground using gravity to blow you forward. Yeah. And the same principles apply to, golf, tennis, baseball, explosive. It's that squat and resistance using gravity and push off of that. I wanted to go back to Nick real quick. We're talking about the BFR. So Nick couldn't lift with one arm. He's been lifting with both legs and his left arm, but we had BFR on all his extremities, and he was doing like isometrics, like we talked about on the right arm. So then when it came time where we were able to get his arm up away from his body up in here and went to do strength testing, it was ridiculous how, that the strength that he had in the injured arm, and he hardly even lifted that arm because we had to lift within.
You got all the growth hormone, all the testosterone levels, and also because you're doing isometrics, you had more motor unit recruitment, and that's what builds up the muscle in terms of size, so atrophy doesn't happen. I bet they're very close in sizes too, but also the function of the muscle. So.
Exactly, the size it's tremendous. I was busting his chops. I was like, man, you look smaller. I think he's actually grown. I was like, make sure your dad measures you tomorrow morning because I'm like, you look thinner. He's like, no, I'm not. I'm still 220. I'm like, no, but you look. It's just. I think part of it is the BFR has been able to eat up some of that body, that baby fat, and that's why you have this kid that's 5'10", 220 that's running, playing center, guard, and middle linebacker that's moving at a 4.8 speed, and then he's Virginia Tech is looking at him, Towson's looking at him for long snap, JMU, because he's got all these components that all add up to being able to launch that ball, was it 15 yards back at 18 miles per hour. I think it's 16, 18 miles. That's what they're looking for in that. But so that explodes that myth of you can't work on treat all the other body parts at the same time. Don't just sit around when you're injured.
Exactly.
Work all the other systems. You can still have gains even though you can't do that. So moving on, I know you work with a lot of swimmers. I've been in there. You've worked with NCAP, which is one of the premier swim clubs in the area. You've trained Katie Ledecky, Ryan Lochte, Matt Hopt, who we got the Olympics coming around. Tell me, what kind of stuff you would have if some of those guys are in your gym now getting ready, in between the trials and the Olympics, which start on the 23rd.
So if we're gonna go between now and then, I would not introduce anything new to them at all. I would just probably keep on the same path that we've been on in terms of exercise choice and volume selection. Because right now we're just trying to hone their skills. Like they're probably trying to get their stroke rate right in the pool, trying to get just their technique right. Are they making sure that they're pulling the water with their lat, not their trap, right? And because that's what's going to lead them to be success in Tokyo when they go there. So on my end, my job is just keep the soreness down, keep them moving well and functional. So that way when they are with their high level training stuff they have now, because these are the best of the best, so now they brought the best of the best coaches, they can get some unique time with them and maybe make some gains in the pool by improving their stroke rate.
That's one of the things that you always see with swimmers, kind of like long distance runners. They just want to swim and get in the pool, and they think, well, if I just swim 5,000 meters or yards today, that's going to do it. No, the kids that excel in the pool are the ones that are doing the work outside of the pool, and those are also the ones that aren't getting injured because their body can withstand the repetitive motion of pulling and kicking in the water. And but also they have to have these top coaches, like Katie does, where they're monitoring the load and say, hey, this is when we push and this is when we when we rest, because that's a huge thing. And like, you don't want to continue to you don't always want to be pressing the accelerator when you're doing your training.
And I bet here's my guess or my tip. I bet you Katie Ledecky drops significant time in all her events at Tokyo, because while all these other swimmers are tapering to get ready for trials to see if they even make the team, she did those times that she did probably with a little taper to no taper is my bet. So at Tokyo,
tell them what tapering is.
So taper is basically when there's like 3 different ways you can taper, but basically it's deloading your training. So if we want to do like a step-by-step one, like let's say you're doing 4 sets of 5, that means next week you're probably doing 3 sets of 5, 2 sets of 5, then 1 set of 5, and then you'd have like your event. So we know our volume's decreasing as we go along, so the body's got more time to rest, less reps on the body, it's feeling fresher, moving better, ready to go. Or you can look at it the same way. Let's say we're doing 4 sets of 5 at 100 pounds. Now maybe next week we do 4 sets of 5 at 80 pounds, 4 sets of 5 at 70 pounds. There's many ways you can go about with the taper. So,
but she's got the advantage of knowing that she's one of the best in the world, and there are very few.
Correct. Yeah.
Very few events that she wasn't going to qualify at the Olympic trials, where a lot of these athletes, some of them that aren't at that elite level, they're trying to peak for the trials because they want to be able to make the games. So that's a huge thing. Is like, hey, it's one thing to make the trials, it's another thing to make the trials and to make the team, and then be able to consistently be able to make it back, and make it.
And I think what I would probably do if those ones reintroduce training right back to them real quick this first 2 weeks, because I think June 17th they would have known if they was when it ended, I think. So those last 2 weeks of June, I probably would have gotten them back in a weight room, moving some significant weight, moving well, getting a lot of glute, core, rear delt stuff in, knowing that we're going to do another taper real quick. That way, because if you taper too long, you sort of lose some of those strength gains of that external stimulus that you feel as a body to get a contrast effect that you would in a pull. So yeah, I'm sure some of them did that. And again, long tapers just means they're going to build up more lactic acid. We want them to be able to continue to clear and flush that lactic acid out.
And we had Jan Damerholt, who trained me in dry needling, and he's also done dry needling on Katie. And I know Katie, like some of the athletes, like they come in and they're like, oh my God, I can't tolerate it. But they'll now, like I know Katie will be in the middle of practice and feel something. She'll roll out of the pool. Therapist will come over, needle her, and she rolls back in. And it's funny. I talked to Taylor. Remember when Taylor came in for the dry needling the first time? He's like, nope, not doing it anymore. Now it's part of his regular regimen.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing with the dry needling. Some people just go get it done and walk away. I think once you do it, the reason why you do it is trying to get tight muscles to release. So now that they're released, let's lengthen and strengthen them. So in Katie's aspect, she's sort of doing that by just jumping in the pool afterwards. So that's where you usually see a lot of it, and how a lot of that dry needling can be successful with athletes.
And getting it on a regular basis, if you are an athlete, because the what happens though is when the muscle gets looser, then it becomes weak. So you definitely need that activation. Even when we had Connor on, he said, I remember when he first came back, he's like, I'd have a bad outing the next day because the muscles weren't really back. It got them really loose, and his arm was really loose and wasn't in the thing. But once he, started firing the muscles back up and they were working optimally, if you do something a little bit off, with coming back from injury, there's going to be some disoptimization, or there's going to be something. There's always going to be something, whether the weather is different, there's more humidity, you're not warmed up. There's something that it's always good to kind of, you got to take care of your body with, like we said, it's the sleep, nutrition, hydration, mobility work that's lacking in these young athletes. They're like, what's a foam roller? I know nothing about foam roller. Well, how do you clear out all that waste out of that and stuff like that? Any closing remarks? I think this is fantastic. I think we need to have you on a regular basis. Oh
yeah, I'd come back anytime. I love chit chatting. So again, like I said, I'm here as a resource to see if you choose to use me or not for training. Just if you want guidance, come out. I'd like, you saw how well me and Andrew chat. Like, this is a normal thing for me. So if you want to have a chat with me and learn, again, use me. I'm a resource. I'm more than happy to give back and give guidance to anyone that wants to pursue this career or needs help in this career. So, or even on the field, I'm here either way. So, thank you, Tpow. Thank you, Andrew.
They have. I got cards in my office. You can get a free week of training with EP to try them out. And Rhys also does. Those of you who aren't local, Rhys also does programming and does online training as well. So just because you're not in Ashburn, and believe it or not, there are people. I don't know if I can drop his name or not, but there's an athlete that plays for the Philadelphia Eagles, and I saw him in the gym this morning because Rhys is the best, and he's in there. He's like, hey, this is a guy that's got me and kept me at a high level, and so you got people coming in from.
Yeah. I mean, you're referring to Ryan Kerrigan. So I've trained for a couple of years. So yeah, I mean, he's back in town for a couple of months. We're right back as we are every off season, getting at it. But like what Andrew was saying, online stuff. I've got athletes out in LA that I train. I also consult teams. Like I helped train during COVID this past year, Will and Mary girls soccer. They lost their whole strength coach training staff. So I was training that whole team through an app. So like again, I got all these resources available. Just see what fits best to fit your needs.
Well, thanks again, buddy. Can't wait to have you on again. We can talk more about injuries and stuff like that. I mean, I totally forgot. What do you think about Giannis coming back from that injury?
Okay. Oh yeah. So that was amazing. Amazing. When that happened, I got about 3 or 4 texts from people, and I was like, all right, worst case scenario, ACL, PCL, MCL, and meniscus. Boom. Like he blew that out. Best case, I said bone bruise. But even for bone bruise, most people are out 2 to 4 weeks. So the fact that he's back and he didn't even have that, it was just more like a joint capsule hyperextension with no bone bruise is amazing. But again, the reason why he's able to come back so fast is what he did to get his body prepared for this season. That's a guy that's in the weight room working on his skills. I don't know his recovery plan, but I'm sure he gets a massage every game, hydrates well, eats well. So because he's been doing that for years, that's why he was able to come back and recover from this injury so fast and give his chance to win in the finals. But I got Suns in 5, so.
Believe it or not, the mechanism to tear the ACL is not that force. That's more of, like you said, a PCL or a strain. I myself have had, and that injury is quite common in basketball because you might land and someone's knee will come in and hit you. And I actually had that playing, and I thought I tore something myself. I had the knee hyperextension and wound up just being, like you said, there was like a bone bruise, and was able to get back out on the basketball court after a couple of weeks. But I wound up having, I wasn't in the level of shape that Giannis is in, but I think I wound up having I'm pretty sure he probably had a cortisone injection to help eat up some inflammation, because that was the main thing. That was the last thing. They had MRIs, they did all the checks, everything was intact, and it was just like, hey, I just have this one pain, and it's like, boom, let's it's not the best thing, but considering you never know when you're going to get to the NBA finals, this is one of the things, an elite athlete, I don't recommend that for youth athletes, but when you're and I don't, even pro athletes, I don't necessarily recommend it. This is a time and place. But believe it or not, my niece was on the adrenaline and the training and their pain tolerance is different than your normal athlete.
The best thing they did was not let him go back that game. So I would say that for sure.
So, well, thanks again. We're closing off this time for good. This is the Get Back with Dombek podcast. Thanks for listening. Subscribe, recommend, refer. My daughter Eden.
Appreciate it, guys.